Every day, fraudsters steal £55 million from the public purse. Today, the bungling thieves who were caught red-handed after openly selling stolen goods on the internet.
These were two individuals who cynically carried out a significant theft of NHS property.
The office worker who swindled the welfare system, saying she could only walk 1 metre every 5 minutes.
The statements we obtained from her colleagues and her line managers indicated that they were not aware of any disability that Pauline had.
And young carers, the son who sacrificed everything to care for his mum.
And the GP said he's a young boy, he's not right that he has to help you to get in and out the shower. He's a child, he should have a life.
When public services are seeing tight squeezes on their finances, the NHS cannot afford to lose precious resources in acts of criminality.
This was a significant sum of money and it was perpetrated by two NHS employees, which is a significant breach of trust and goes against everything the NHS stands for.
One attack on the system which astounded investigators was when thieves used modern technology to get rid of their haul.
It was the brazen way in which they actually sold them on an exceptionally well-known, internationally known auction site.
The counter-fraud team that look after the NHS in Scotland recently received some information about a potential crime involving dentistry equipment. Suspicions were raised over a set of handpieces. That's the dentist drill and the attachments that go with them. Gordon Young is head of counter-fraud services within NHS Scotland and is responsible for protecting health service budgets from financial crime.
In September of 2013, my department was made aware that NHS Lothian had been contacted by a company called W&H Dental Work. W&H Dental Work had in fact been contacted by a dentist who had purchased a number of their handpieces on an auction site. The dentist was inquiring as to whether these handpieces were still under warranty.
On investigation, the serial numbers of the pieces being sold matched those on items that were bought by NHS Lothian in March 2012. Being sold on an auction site 18 months later rang alarm bells. Fraser Paterson works in NHS counter-fraud alongside Gordon Young.
Well, NHS Lothian were obviously concerned about the fact that their handpieces were not being used for the purpose they were intended, so they carried out a stock check of the handpieces that they held. Now, what it transpired was that through their checks established that they were short of some 318 handpieces which they couldn't account for.
With handpieces costing £500 each, this added up to £166,000 worth of equipment which was missing. The team wanted to find out who was behind a theft of this nature.
Our first step in the investigation was to look at the original allegation which had been in relation to an auction site. So we carried out extensive inquiries with the auction site, and from that we identified two individuals of interest. The employee that we identified was an individual called Darren Lawson. We made inquiries with NHS Lothian to establish if he was known to them, and it transpired that Darren Lawson was in fact a van driver and storeman.
Throughout his work, he had direct access to the 300 handpieces which were located at both Duncan Street Dental Centre in Edinburgh and Eden Hall Hospital in Musselburgh, 6 miles outside of the city.
The dental handpieces in question were originally stored within Eden Hall Hospital. It's now no longer functional. For a number of years it's been primarily used as a storage facility. Darren Lawson transported them from this location to another location, and we believe at that time was when he stole these handpieces.
Knowing that over 300 dental handpieces had been stolen, the team started looking at who was selling these items online.
What we were able to establish when we checked with the internet auction site was that this individual seller appeared to have no connection to the NHS, and yet they were able to access these items and to sell them around the world. So obviously the quandary for us was around how do we tie this into how they'd gone missing in the first place.
The seller had sold 42 items at a value of £17,000 to dentists in 11 different countries, including Australia, Canada, and the United States. So how had he accessed these items?
So what we then discovered was that there was a link between this individual seller and an NHS employee, Darren Lawson, and the fact that through that link, it seemed likely that he had stolen these items because of the access he had, and they had been passed on to this associate who had sold them on the internet.
Now they had a link between the person who stole the equipment and the seller. The team could apply for search warrants to try to arrest Lawson and his associate and search their properties for further evidence.
We contacted our Police Scotland colleagues, and as a result of that, searches took place at the home address of Darren Lawson and at the address of his associate. And as a result of that search, we discovered 129 brand new handpieces which were in the same condition as they'd been sold to NHS Lothian in the associate's address.
The handpieces were discovered still in their original packaging, and a check of the serial numbers established they'd been sold to the NHS in Scotland and were valued at £66,000. Also recovered from the associate's house were 6 blood-checking monitors valued at £4,500, identical to ones originally stored at the Duncan Street Dental Centre. Interestingly, none of the equipment was found at Lawson's address, nor did he seem to be directly benefiting from the crime.
I think what appeared clear was that Lawson was being quite calculating in his actions. It looked as though he had stolen these items, and yet he had passed them on to an associate for that associate to have sold them on. And that obviously was less risky for him, I'm assuming.
Both Darren Lawson and his associate were arrested and interviewed under caution, and further investigations were carried out into them. Later, the web of crime increases as the team discover further accomplices.
All of a sudden, we now had 4 people involved.
We heard earlier about the 2 NHS employees that brazenly stole dental equipment in Edinburgh and then offloaded it via an online auction site. Darren Lawson and an accomplice have been arrested and interviewed. But 2 separate lines of inquiry reveal that there are more than 2 people involved in the operation.
After Mr. Lawson was actually arrested, we made further inquiries, primarily in relation to his mobile telephone, and from that, another associate of his was identified.
At the same time, the NHS counter-fraud team received a revealing email with allegations that dental equipment was being sold on the internet under the pseudonym of Ital Scott 2012. Someone who wasn't so far on their radar.
About that same time, we were contacted by a dentist who had been pointed in our direction by the manufacturer, and he explained that he had purchased some handpieces from an individual seller on the internet auction site, and we had those details as well. So that identified for us another individual, and that individual turned out to be another NHS employee by the name of Gianni Donofrio.
Gianni Donofrio worked for the NHS as a site supervisor at the Royal Infirmary of Edinburgh. But this was a different NHS base to the one where Darren Lawson worked. Without knowing what the connection was between the 2 men, they couldn't link Donofrio to the theft.
It wasn't clear to us how he could have stolen these items himself. And it was only subsequently when he was interviewed that we understood that there was a relationship between the 2, because they both had worked together at the Royal Infirmary of Edinburgh at some point in the past.
Having identified 2 further individuals, again working with our colleagues in Police Scotland, we requested further search warrants for these new home addresses.
Good afternoon, could I speak to Chief Superintendent Smith?
With our colleagues at Police Scotland, these warrants were executed, but this time no material property was recovered from either of the home addresses. When we're carrying out an investigation, we're expected to carry out all reasonable lengths of inquiry to identify the potential suspects who have actually committed these offences. So we carry out extensive inquiries, which may be checking the voters roll, it may be checking company's house, it would be making inquiries with the auction site, it would be making inquiries with the police to establish if these individuals had any sort of previous convictions.
On the 1st of November 2013, Gianni Donofrio and another associate were detained by Police Scotland and interviewed under caution. The team now decided they had enough evidence to report Lawson and Donofrio to the Crown Office and the Procurator Fiscal Service to see if they would initiate proceedings against them. In total, in excess of £160,000 worth of dental equipment had been stolen. And counter-fraud services had recovered £65,000 of this from items found at the men's properties. On the 26th of March 2015, both men received their verdict.
So we established from the Procurator Fiscal that Lawson and Donofrio had both pled guilty. Darren Lawson had pled guilty to £75,000 worth of theft, and Donofrio had pled guilty to £75,000 worth of reset, which is similar to handling stolen goods in England, in English law.
The two other associates pleaded not guilty, and this was accepted by the court. Lawson and Donofrio's fate was laid bare by the judge.
We were both sentenced to 9 months custodial sentence, which is an important deterrent message for counter-fraud services and the NHS in Scotland. These were two individuals who cynically carried out a significant theft of NHS property.
The investigators believe that the blatant abuse of the system was the key flaw in Lawson and Donofrio's grand plan.
The fact that they were brazen was actually their downfall. They believed that they were untouchable. They have actually placed stolen property on a website that is viewed by several million people, but it was that brazen attitude that ultimately resulted in them being prosecuted.